Hey, everybody, it's Scott Steen with winnersandwhiners.com coming to you with our Monday edition of Today in Sports Betting. Happy week, I don't know, 814 of the coronavirus lockdown. Good to have you aboard. We're going to talk a little UFC today with my partner, my host, my co-host. He's joining us all the way from Long Island, New York. You know, if he ever goes anywhere, that's going to be cool because we're going to talk about where he is then. But for now, just like I'm locked down, he's locked down out there in Long Island. He is Scott Reichel. Scott, happy Monday. How are you today, man?
Doing pretty well. Yeah, I kind of wish I was also traveling, but some things are permissible and some things are not in today's society. So I'm kind of
Starting to open the country back up, man. So I've got my I've got my fingers crossed and I've got my doubts. It's like taking an underdog, you know. I got a bad feeling, but we're hoping for the best, man. Hopefully we got a little more herd immunity than we think we have at this point. That's my only.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, people have had the prayers that the warmer weather might potentially help out. I always was skeptical of that, but there's still a chance maybe that might have some type of positive impact. Nobody really knows, but we actually had live sports this weekend, which was definitely a nice change of pace. Based on what I thought about the card going in, it pretty much lived up to the billing, and I also thought that it would be one of the most highly bet cards, and we had Dave Mason on roughly a week or two ago. And according to Bet Online, actually on Twitter, they said, I believe it was either the most action they've ever had on a UFC card, but it was definitely top three. So that was the way that I thought it was going to go, and it pretty much worked itself out. With the exception of any UFC card that's had McGregor on it. I think it was one of the most successful UFC cards they've ever had.
See, and that kind of confirms the theory that you and I both hold after we've seen a couple of UFC cards. We've seen the NFL draft do, what did he say, 5 times the business that they normally do.
People are just itching for sports at this point.
Exactly my point. I think there is a pent-up desire. And when they start playing live sports, I think the floodgates are going to open. So we're going to do kind of a double show today. We're going to take a quick review of Saturday's action. You're going to tell us some of the highlights, some of the surprises, some of the upsets there, and then we're going to take a look at the unusual card from Wednesday. Unusual in the some of the fighters, and unusual in that it's a 2 p.m. Eastern start time in the middle of the day on Wednesday. So. Should be fun. Strap in, everybody. We're going to do a little UFC, a little more live betting this week on Real Sports. So, Scott, take it away. What are you looking at for Saturday night? How did Saturday night go for you, first of all?
Overall, went pretty well. A lot of people might think that it went badly for me. I'll go into that. So I gave out 3 official plays on Twitter initially. I'd say about, I don't know, maybe 12 hours before the actual card started, give or take. Solid 0-3. Not exactly what you were going to write home about. Not exactly the way that I wanted. But then I'd say about 5 hours before the card, maybe a little bit sooner, I decided I got cabin fever. I got to throw out some more bets. So I decided to bet on all of the money lines for the fights, as well as the exact outcomes for every fight. So I just doubled down on some fights. I was just having a fun time, whatever. And for the money lines for all the fights, I ended up going 6-5 for plus 0.19 units. Pretty much broke even. You bet $100, you made $19. And then I did an exact outcome for every single fight. So I picked who I thought was going to win and the method that they were going to win. And I ended up going 4-7 for plus 9.28 units.
Okay.
So based on that, I actually was profitable during the UFC card. But so a lot of people potentially thought I lost money because of the 0-3 day, but they also didn't realize that for my predictions with the outcome, I actually bet on all those myself. And for that reason, I made roughly 8 and change units on the card.
Not a bad day. Not a bad
overall,
day.
Yeah, it was pretty good. But of course, it would have been a lot nicer had I not gone 0-3 for the plays, because all 3 plays that I gave out were plus 260 and higher. So if I won one of them, I would have been up also on the official plays. But unfortunately, it was worked out. But overall, I made some profit, so I can't really complain.
And really taking some great steps to establish the credibility of the show here.
Well, I mean, I made money in the end. It was just the official plays that I made initially didn't work out. But then eventually I looked through all the fights and I realized, you know what? I haven't placed a real sports bet, and besides, not counting draft stuff, but on like a live sporting event.
Right.
So I just decided, like, honestly, just screw it. I'm just gonna have some fun here tonight. But of course, bet within your reasons. I don't recommend you do that in the future. Just bet on every single fight. But if you have enough of a bankroll that should be extra safe because you haven't been using it that much lately, then I feel like you can afford to potentially splurge a little bit. And I kind of treated it like a Super Bowl because I wanted to. So I did that, worked itself out. So big
Very
winner,
good.
though, for me was Oleinik. He was one of, if not the biggest underdog on the card. He ended up taking on Verdum. I mentioned Oleinik in the show as an underdog. I had money on him. Well, first of all, I bet on him a couple of times because I had free play. I used all my free play balance on him at plus 265, and he won. And I also had him by decision for my exact outcome thing. Him to win by decision on FanDuel was plus 1,100, and he won by decision. So it was definitely a very nice score there. But one thing I noticed about the card itself, the judges were absolutely terrible. It was one of the worst performances by judges I've ever seen. You had roughly, I think, 4 split decisions, give or take, which is kind of ridiculous. A lot of bad jobs by the judges there, which was a little bit concerning. But overall, the fight card was entertaining. The main event was very good, and honestly, the main card was also pretty good. A lot of action, and I don't think this card on Wednesday is going to live up to the hype that Saturday did, because the fighters on Saturday are definitely a lot more prominent than the fighters on Wednesday. But it's better than no live sports at all. So, can't really complain about it.
Yeah, and you talk about, people using, there's the first real sports bet you've made. I'm kind of in the same boat, although I would say
well, you were betting some baseball. You were betting some baseball in there.
I was going to say, I haven't made a winning sports bet.
Yeah. I haven't even gotten into the Korean baseball thing. My accounts have literally just been untouched. I mean, excluding the draft. From a live sport perspective, I think the last bet I might have made might have been NBA. I'm not even joking. I actually have not touched pretty much any balance in any of my accounts besides draft props. And that was it. I haven't touched anything since. So some people had the itch earlier on. They were betting on – well, actually, that's not true because I had money on Secretariat and virtual horse racing. But you know what I mean, like for live sports stuff. But some people got the itch for Korean baseball. Some people have the itch for some other sports, some virtual NASCAR, some Counter-Strike, esports stuff.
Right.
I bet on Secretariat for fun because I thought it was amusing to bet on a virtual horse race on NBC on a Saturday, which was an easy cash, by the way. But other than that, no, I've just kind of been itching for something I could actually watch in person where I didn't, I'd say, cringe looking at the television, going, why did I bet this? What was I thinking? I don't know anything about this topic. I mean, that's kind of why I was on UFC, is because I actually had time to break down the cards and go through it. And, it was fun. And that's really all it comes down to, besides profit.
So the biggest payoff you had there was Oleinik in a split decision.
I didn't have split. Just a regular decision was plus 1,100. It ended up going to a split decision.
But it ended up being a split decision, 29-28, 29-28, and 28-28.
28-29.
As an objective observer, did you agree with that decision?
Truth is, I thought Oleinik easily won the fight.
Okay.
See, the thing about UFC or just any type of fight, boxing also, some people, when they actually watch fights, are going to be completely biased towards their fighters, which makes perfect sense because you have money on it. So you're viewing everything that your opponent does as being unimpressive, and everything that your fighter that you bet on is more impressive. I don't do that for UFC because I'm just a fan. So I can also try to remove my personal bias from the equation. A lot of people don't do that, but it also works for live betting, where if you are in the middle of watching a fight, some people might just go, oh, my guy is looking great, this other guy's terrible. But in reality, your guy hasn't really done anything for the last 5 minutes, and he's clearly losing the fight. They just don't want to admit it. I was watching the fight. Oleinik clearly won the first round. He was just destroying Verdum in the first round. The second and third round was a little bit tricky because Verdum started to take down my guy, but he didn't really do much with the takedowns. and Oleinik dominated in pretty much every single stand-up exchange. So for me, the judges were nuts the entire night, but I knew for a fact that Oleinik won all the first round on all 3 scorecards. So I figured he won at least the second or third round on at least 2 of the 3, and I should win the fight. And that's actually exactly what happened. All 3 judges gave him the first round, and then you had some debates about who won the second and third round. But since I knew automatically I was up 1 round, my odds were definitely solid, and he ended up winning by split decision. There were a couple of decisions which I found questionable, but that decision was not one of them.
All right. And what do you think about ex-NFL player Greg Hardy? It looks like he's continuing to evolve as a heavyweight. Unanimous decision over Jorgen De Castro. Was that a surprise to you, Scott? I know we weren't real high on Greg Hardy when we talked about him on the show. Did his performance shock you in any way?
Yeah, I'm pissed. I had him winning by knockout, so I had to deal with that. But I thought Hardy was going to win. De Castro was undefeated. I'm trying to remember if he was officially undefeated, but
undefeated as a pro is what it says.
Yeah, but he didn't have much UFC success, so he was undefeated in a lesser league. Overall, Hardy. Listen, I understand if you don't like him personally because of some of his off the field stuff that he had when he was in the NFL, and I understand that. Considering the lack of full preparation he's actually had to make the transition to the UFC, he's only been professional for, I'd say, around 2 years, give or take. He's actually not terrible. Is he a great fighter? No. But for somebody who completely switched careers and now punches people for a living, I actually don't think he's a terrible fighter. Now, is he going to be a title contender or anything like that? No, of course not. And I know the UFC only brought him on because he sells tickets because he's a big name and a controversial figure. I thought he was going to win. He also got very lucky. De Castro won the first round, and then De Castro, I want to say he broke a toe. Something happened. He went for a leg kick, and he just couldn't really move his left leg after that. And De Castro pretty much shut it down for the final 10 minutes. So he was actually winning. Hardy didn't look great the first round. He was kind of taking a beating with some leg kicks. And then De Castro just stopped throwing anything because he literally couldn't move. And Hardy just pieced him, I'd say, from a distance to death. And then the fight was pretty much over. It was a very boring fight, if I'm being honest. But Hardy, he had a chance to jump on top in the third round. De Castro fell down because he literally couldn't put any pressure on his leg. And Hardy, instead of jumping on him and probably knocking him out, he decided to just stand up and kick him and just wait it out. And even though it was boring, and even though I had personal money on Hardy by knockout, it was probably the right move because he was guaranteed to win the second and third round based on how the fight played out. So I wasn't surprised by the outcome. I had Hardy winning. I just thought he'd win by knockout, and then he ended up playing it safe. Fight was pretty boring, though, so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people would rather not see Greg Hardy in the future in main event cards because he didn't win in spectacular fashion. But overall, yeah, I thought he looked decent. I mean, he got pretty lucky the other guy got injured, but he looked pretty good.
What was the best fight of the night, whether you won it or not, just from an objective fan standpoint? What was the most entertaining fight of the evening?
I'd say the most entertaining fight was probably the main event between Gaethje and Ferguson. There were a couple of really entertaining fights, but they were 3 rounds, or they were even less. So, for example, the Ngannou fight was entertaining. It was 20 seconds. So that doesn't really count, but it was still a very entertaining moment. If you're looking at other fights, you had the Price-Luque fight, which ended up going to a third-round knockout. That fight was entertaining. Luque ended up winning by knockout like I thought he would. Other than that, though, the best knockout of the night for me was Qatar against Stevens. Very entertaining round and a half. And Qatar hit Stevens with a massive elbow to the front of the head. And Stevens' head pretty much exploded. Just gushing blood. He collapsed and the fight was over. So that fight itself was very entertaining. It wasn't exactly that long for entertainment, but the knockout was precise and it was fantastic. But for an overall fight for entertainment, the Gaethje-Ferguson fight, Ferguson pretty much got beat up for 25 minutes. and I'd say 23 minutes actually, because he got knocked out with about a minute and a half left in the fight.
Right.
He didn't hit the ground once. And Ferguson, even though he lost, had one of the toughest chin displays I've ever seen in my life in a UFC fight. He should have hit the ground maybe 5 times, but he didn't hit the ground. He did get embarrassed, and Herb Dean stopped it. I thought correctly, because I thought he was going to get destroyed as he was, wobbling around. But overall, I was impressed with Ferguson's chin, but Gaethje absolutely just pieced him together, and I thought that fight was very entertaining to watch.
That's a pretty amazing. When you talk about, well, it just goes 5 rounds, and it doesn't sound like that much, but 25 minutes of pretty much extreme exertion and fighting. That is you got to be in pretty good shape, is what I'm saying.
Ferguson, that was one of the greatest displays for a chin I've ever seen in the UFC. Having said that, he got blown out, and he landed one brief knockdown on an uppercut in the last 3 seconds of the second round. Besides those 3 seconds, Gaethje absolutely dominated the fight pretty much in its entirety. But Tony Ferguson took a beating, and he just didn't go down. And it was extremely impressive. But even if Gaethje did not win by knockout, I thought it was a clear, I'd say, 49-46 fight. I thought that it could have been 50-45, but I personally would have actually given Ferguson the second round because I thought it was a toss-up, but then he landed a knockdown late, which I thought would have been enough to sway it. But for me, Gaethje easily won 4 of those 5 rounds. It really wasn't close.
Scott, there was certainly the problem, the challenge in boxing. They talk about, in my younger day, they used to call it, punch drunk, and now, of course, we recognize it as CTE.
I call it drunk boxing, but yes, that also works.
Is there any evidence, or has this sport been around long enough where we've started to see any signs of CTE in some of the older combatants?
The truth is, if you're comparing it to other combat sports, no, not really. Now, some of that has to do with how long the sport's actually been popular and been around. But if you compare the amount of injuries that you have with NFL to MMA from head trauma perspectives, I would say that you probably have more head trauma issues in the NFL. And the main reason why I'm saying that is because even though people are getting punched in the face, and even though that's definitely not going to be good for your head, I don't think it's as bad as people running at 22 miles an hour and using their bodies as battering rams to chuck into your head. I feel like that's probably worse.
It just kind of made me think about that when you talk about the guy caught an elbow and his head exploded.
Yeah, if you actually look at it, that's basically what happened.
That'd be good.
I'm not even exaggerating. That's actually not good, but I don't know. There could be a decent amount of issues that you have, kind of like boxing, where it exists, but maybe they just do a good job of hiding it, or maybe they just do a good job of not fully disclosing all that information. Because how many CT cases have you seen with boxing? I mean, I know that you have some Parkinson's issues with like Muhammad Ali and some other people, but in terms of the CTE thing, have you noticed that many things in boxing over the years? Because I really haven't.
Well, I'm not enough of a fan of the sweet science to see these guys in their older years. I mean, obviously Muhammad Ali had Parkinson's, but George Foreman seems okay. Joe Frazier kind of died a premature death. So
you also had some boxers who passed away in the ring last year, which was also a thing. But I know, but I don't want to say that I'm fully informed in this area, but when it comes to CTE stuff, I actually think the NFL is probably the worst when it comes to CTE damage. Just because it's not just the NFL, it's also the fact that all of these people in the league have been playing football in Pop Warner since they were like 5 or 6 years old. So there's a ton of collisions in there. You can make the argument saying these people have been training for MMA or for boxing since they were at a young age, and I agree with that. I also don't think that there are many boxing leagues going around for 7-year-olds.
Like the police league and stuff, but they're all using headgear all the way.
That's what I'm. Yeah, but you're also using that in NFL, so I can't, or in football, so I can't really make that comparison. But I don't know. I feel like most people, when they're younger, starting to train and work up the ranks, I feel like they're mostly training on punching bags and just speed bags and stuff like that. I feel like they don't start actually getting hit until, I don't know, maybe, like 13? Maybe I'm completely wrong, but that's kind of my assumption on that.
Oh, I think you're probably right.
So most football players have like a 6-year head start when it comes to getting physical contact, because they're starting when they're in like grade school.
Yeah, I just speaking from personal experience, I played football all the way through first year in college, and 4 different times I lost consciousness playing football.
Well, when did you start playing football?
I started playing tackle football at about the age of 10.
Okay. So either or, we're both under the agreement that most mixed martial arts are even, I say boxing for the most part.
Yeah.
You are mostly having combat against somebody else who's fighting back, probably around 13, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say at earliest. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. So most people, when it comes to football, are playing when they're like 7. So you have a lot of extra collisions there, which aren't going to help in the long run.
Right. That's a good point. And a lot of problems, stem from practice. Hell, we ran the, Oklahoma drills and all kinds of things where you're
I think that drill's
heads.
just stupid. I don't get the point of the Oklahoma drill. In what situation are you really going to be in a one-on-one scenario on a football field where you can just truck the guy?
You know what? It's about winning the combat. It's about winning.
It's a battle of wills, and I understand that, but I don't know why you can't just show a battle of wills in practice. I know the idea of 2 people just running head first into each other in practice, surrounded in a circle by teammates to pump you up, doesn't exactly seem like the most productive drill to me. Am I wrong for thinking that?
Well,
I know it's about camaraderie. I know that it's a lot about, pumping the team up, and I understand that from just a bonding perspective. I just think it's stupid. Maybe that's just me. I just never understood the point of the Oklahoma.
Well, I got to tell you, Scott, when I was doing it, I thought it was great because I was an undersized, hard-hitting linebacker, and I loved to hit people. I loved to hit people. But by the time my son got to high school, I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they had started making, with, excuse me, in high school football, they had a baseline for the concussion for these kids and all this stuff. A lot of concussion protocol that just didn't exist when I played, 30 years earlier. So
the equivalent that I would say, imagine that you're running a basketball practice for, let's just say a high school team, right? And at some point in the middle of your practice, you decided, all right, we're going to have 2 people and they're going to have a one-on-one in the middle of practice while the rest of you do nothing. Isn't that basically what the Oklahoma drill is? I know you can sub people in and out, but you're basically taking most of the team and telling them to sit around and watch for about half an hour.
Yeah, and of
course, the
Oklahoma drill, of course, you're running everybody through. Everybody gets a shot. You just get in line. And
at some point, but I mean, and what, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just viewing it from a team perspective. I just don't really get the point. But I understand that the nature of football and football enthusiasts love that drill because it's all about toughness and what the sport's about. But in practice, I feel like you shouldn't really be trying to beat each other up too badly, which is the sole purpose of the drill.
Yeah, and that's a mindset that's definitely changed. It's definitely changed from the 60s and 70s to present day, and I think it's going to continue to change. I've asked, I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but if I had it to do over again, I probably wouldn't have let my son play football. I kept him in flag all the way through.
Wasn't your fault though? He had a cannon. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but he developed those skills playing flag football because it was a passing league.
Mm-hmm.
So he developed a lot of the skills that he had by playing flag football. He was very elusive because he, even though he's a slow white boy like his dad, he was able to develop some elusiveness in the pocket because they didn't have to tackle you. They had to grab your flag. So he had to completely stay away from people. So I probably wouldn't have let him play. But the worst injury he ever had was playing flag football. Him and another kid dove for a ball and hit heads. So
that's going to happen. So
Yeah, so even at that point. All right, so anyway, kind of went down the rabbit hole there. All right, Scott, let's talk about this Wednesday card. This is a Wednesday, 2 p.m. Is it is it the same kind of thing?
Are you sure it's 2 p.m.? Because I'm seeing conflicting stuff about maybe it being at 6:30.
Oh, you know what? I'm looking at oh, I've got the Saturday slate here, Scott. I do not have. There we go.
I think it's
No,
around 6:30, give or take.
no, I've got it. I have it listed, Scott. Wednesday the 13th at 2 p.m.
Okay, because I'm looking at one source that says like 6:30 and another that says potentially 2. So check your TV listings. That's all I'll tell you. It's going to be sometime.
Okay.
But,
Okay, good enough. That I got to tell you, 6:30 would make a lot more sense. We talked a little bit before the show about why they would do 2 o'clock, and our best guess was Leonard Skinner reunion concert in the Jacksonville Arena.
Yeah, I don't. That doesn't really make any sense to me because unless they are really confident that nobody's working, so they can just throw a card out anytime they want,
right?
Which maybe I guess makes some sense, but at the end of the day, I don't really get it. Now, it is worth mentioning though that this card is not going to be on regular ESPN at any point. This card is going to be solely on ESPN Plus, so a decent amount of people probably will not have access to it unless they pay for it. But
it's not a
there are no titles
pay-per-view, right?
I don't think it's an additional pay-per-view. I think that if you get regular ESPN Plus, you should have access to it, which costs, I think, like $9 a month, $10 a month.
No, it's like $5, $4.99.
I guess something like that. But I know that it's not. You're not gonna have to pay $60. I can tell you that for a fact.
Okay, cool. So I'll have it. I have it. By the way, and I don't get anything from ESPN, but when sports start back up, ESPN Plus is really, really good to have if you want to watch a lot of different college basketball and a few different college football games.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the issue is that they kind of target an older audience, just in the sense that, I mean, I feel like that most of the people my age can pretty much find anything for free online in the span of about 5 minutes. So I don't know how practical paying for a broadcast actually is for people my age who are familiar with computers. But when it comes to an older-ish demographic, I'd say 30s to, 50s or 60s, then I feel like ESPN Plus is a very solid
option. Scott, do you have any compunction about basically stealing services?
I have no comment about that. Okay. If you want to ask me about that, I plead the fifth, and we can talk about that some other time.
Okay, so on the betting side, and I'm still fighting with Bet Online, but I've got my bookie up. They've got it at 2 o'clock, but on the actual UFC site, they show it at 8 p.m. Central Time.
Okay.
So it looks like
8 p.m. Okay, that sounds a little late. We'll meet in the middle. We'll say it's on some point on Wednesday. That's all that really matters.
Just turn on ESPN Plus on Wednesday. It'll be there at some point. So.
Yeah, that's my advice to you also.
Okay, so that's the main event. Now we're going backwards. Hang on. 5 o'clock is the prelims, it looks like. Okay, so it looks like 5 p.m. Central, so 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Prelims, 8 p.m. 9 p.m. Eastern for the main card. So there we go. Okay. All right, so moving on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the fights here. What you want to just start at the beginning, Scott? Do you have an opinion on all of these?
Yeah, I already looked through all of them. There are a couple of fights where I'll be very straightforward and tell you that there's not really much value in anything. But it is worth mentioning that I did go through the sports books yesterday. I went through DraftKings, FoxBet, and FanDuel to try to find props. So I was looking for exact outcomes, winner by submission, winner by knockout, stuff like that. And for the most part, it was all non-existent. They didn't really upload anything besides just regular money lines and a little bit of totals here and there. So I might not have lines for you just because of the fact that sportsbooks haven't been updated, but I still have some opinions about the fights, and as soon as the lines come out, I can mention it. But I checked yesterday, and pretty much no props were available. You only had maybe 4 options when it came to bets on all the fights. So there wasn't much available.
Generally speaking, do you like to bet exact outcomes better than you like betting the money line?
It depends on the fight, which is a huge cop-out answer. But for the most part, a lot of these fighters, even though MMA is all about being well-rounded and being able to succeed in multiple ways, that's only the elite fighters. The elite fighters are able to win in multiple ways. Most other fighters in the prelim cards and all this other stuff are kind of specialists, where you look at them and you say, this guy could technically win this way, but he normally wins 70-something% of the time by knockout. So if I'm going to take him winning, I should probably take knockout. So some of these guys, I'd say, are more likely to be specialists earlier in the card before you get the people who can win in a variety of ways.
So if it goes to the ground, one guy could be in big trouble.
Correct. Because what I'm saying is that most of the time when you say, well, this guy can win in a variety of ways, usually he's fighting for a championship at some point. So those guys are elite, and they're later on in the cards. Earlier on in the cards, you're having people who pretty much only succeed in plan A, and then they might have a really, really average to below average plan B. So if you bet on their plan A, it's usually going to provide you decent value, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's start off with one of the premium cards here. First one I've got listed on my card is Anthony Smith and Glover Teixeira. Smith is a prohibitive favorite there, or a good favorite, -180 plus 150 for Teixeira. Scott, any upsets on the horizon here?
For me, Teixeira is very old. I am impressed that he actually has managed to hang around that long. He's 40 years old. I thought when he ended up getting knocked out by Gustafsson back in 2017, I thought he was pretty much done, because Gustafsson made him do the drunk walk that we were talking about, and he was just wobbling all over the place, and then he got knocked out. But after that, he's actually won 4 of his last 5 fights. He's won each of his last 3. Teixeira is an elite-level submission guy. And I know that he's won 17 of his 30 fights by knockout. He's very good in the submission game, and he's won each of his last 3 fights by submission. But for me, I really just think Anthony Smith is the better fighter. Now, Smith had a very interesting break in between his fights, where Smith hasn't fought since June of 2019. He's also known for being that UFC fighter who had a home invasion roughly a month or 2 ago, where somebody broke into his house and was trying to pretty much wrestle him at knife point in front of his family, like roughly a month and a half ago. So he has had, well, Smith ended up winning because he's still alive and the other guy got arrested. But yeah, he pretty much fought for his life on a random night at like 2 a.m. Somebody just broke into his house. Apparently it was some elite high school wrestler from a couple of years ago or something. And yeah, so Smith definitely had an unexpected situation going on, which I hope nobody has to endure. But he got through that, and he's still going to be on this card. In terms of the actual fight, though, Smith is 31. Teixeira is 40. Smith is 33-14, 18 wins by knockout, 12 by submission. I think that's important because even though Smith is better in the stand-up, 12 submissions makes me believe that as long as he can prevent Teixeira from potentially ending it on the ground, it's going to be all about the defense on the ground for me. I don't think he's going to win by submission, but I think as long as he limits Teixeira's effectiveness to create transitions, I got Smith by knockout. I think Smith's the better fighter. I think Smith has more power. I think Teixeira, even though in the past he was good in the stand-up, I don't think he's nearly the same guy he once was. I think he's pretty much a submission-exclusive fighter. And for that reason, I just think Smith has too much firepower in the stand-up and he should win by knockout. So for me, if I was going to bet it, which I will take Smith by knockout because of the fact that it is 5 rounds. So you are less likely to go to a decision. And I think Smith is just superior by a large degree in the stand-up. So that's where I'd lean for that fight.
Now, am I seeing this right, that Teixeira outweighs Smith by 20 pounds?
Well, the way that it works, though, is that you also have to wonder if any fighters in particular are going to be moving up or down in weight classes. So just because of the weight that they listed doesn't necessarily mean that that's the correct weight. As far as I know, both fighters should be fighting at around 205. So they should be around the same weight. The reason why that's listed is because it could be possible that for previous fights, they fought at 225 or something like that. And they don't take into account the weight cuts or where they should be at for a specific fight. So the weight itself is misleading. If they're in the same weight class, they're usually going to be around the same weight with give or take 2 pounds.
Okay, because that's what I wondered. That seems like a except for a heavyweight fight, that seemed like a pretty much huge gap.
Yeah, they both should be around 205 by weigh-in.
Is that light heavyweight? Is it to 205 and below?
Yeah. So I can go through the entire UFC weight class stuff, but that would take a little while. But for the sake of this fight in itself, they should be fighting at light heavyweight. So that is not really going to be an issue.
Okay.
Light heavyweight, literally the cutoff is at 205. So
All right.
that's fine.
Any value there? Any value there at Smith at 180? Or are you most likely going to pass?
Personally, I'm not interested in 180, even though I think he's better. I am a little bit concerned with how much stamina Teixeira will have at 40 to go a full 25 minutes with a younger fighter. So for me, I would go by exact outcome here. I would take Smith by knockout.
Okay. We could probably do a whole show on the home invasion. I'm fascinated that I guess the kid, the wrestler knew who it was that lived there?
I have no idea. I also don't know why you break into a house in the middle of quarantine when literally everybody's home. There's a lot of questions to go into what happened. Smith actually did an interview with an ESPN reporter on UFC, Ariel Helwani. He actually went on a show and he talked about the actual ordeal. And it's kind of crazy. But if you wanted to look at that, you can look up an interview or just some news reports about it.
I'm actually going to check that out.
About a month ago.
All right. Interesting. All right. So next fight looks like on the card is a heavyweight bout between Ben Rothwell and here goes my first name of the day. How about Ovens St Preux?
Close enough.
Nice. These guys are both. One of them is Ben Rothwell's big guy. Listen, that's a 6'2", 6'6".
Huge dude.
And Ovens St Preux is listed at 205, so a little bit of a difference there. Probably, like you say, there will be some narrowing of that gap before the fight, but not surprisingly, surprisingly rather the little guy, if you can call 205 little, he's the favorite here, minus 145, while Ben Rothwell checks in at plus 115. Scott, tell us about this fight.
For me, I like the quote-unquote little guy here with St Preux. I actually made money on Rothwell's last fight. I had money on him winning by knockout against Steven Struve. I watched the fight. It was not a good one. And the reason why I say that is that Rothwell was getting absolutely destroyed for about maybe the first 7.5 minutes. But within the first 7.5 minutes, he accidentally kicked Struve in the nuts twice. And the ref had to pretty much briefly stop the fight while Struve was on the ground, basically crying in pain. And the ref convinced Struve to continue fighting, even though he couldn't really feel anything in his groin area. And then Struve immediately got knocked out roughly a minute later. So it was a little bit sketchy with how the fight turned out because Rothwell was losing, and then he hit 2 illegal shots, and then he ended up turning the fight around when Struve decided to continue. So I really wasn't impressed by Rothwell in his last fight. So I kind of think he's well past his prime. He was on a 3-fight losing streak. Then he fought Struve and he won. Struve came out of retirement to take that fight. He was also losing that fight before, and then he got pretty lucky with the outcome. St Preux, even though he hasn't been much better, he lost to Dominic Reyes in a decision. Nothing to be upset about. I thought Reyes beat John Jones and probably deserves to be the champion right now. He lost to Nikita Krylov, who's also very good in a submission game. He's also very solid. And then he won his last fight by submission. The main thing here, St Preux is just a significantly better wrestler. And for that reason, I think he should be able to take this to the ground. Rothwell is exclusively a stand-up fighter, and he does virtually nothing else. He's also pretty out of shape because he's also pretty old. So he's kind of around the same age as St Preux, but St Preux, I think personally, no offense, is in a little bit better shape. So for that reason, I think that Rothwell should struggle a little bit dealing with the more athletic and the better wrestler in this fight, who also has a submission game. So for me, I think St Preux is going to win this fight. If I had to bet one way, I'd probably lean to decision, but there is a chance Preux wins by submission. So for me, this is one of those spots where St Preux can win in a variety of ways. where Rothwell, I think, can only win really one way. So for that reason, I'll lean to St Preux there because I just think that there are more outcomes where he can come out on top.
Yeah, a full 75% of Rothwell's victories have come by way of knockout or TKO. So it looks like if you get him to the mat, it's going to be a long day for the nut kicker.
Yeah, that's how I would put that. If you look at St. Preux's record, on the contrary, he's won 11 fights by knockout and 8 by submission. So he has the ability to win in a variety of ways. Now, if St. Preux is going to win, he needs to pretty much avoid staying exclusively in the stand-up. Because Rothwell, even though he might be out of shape, he's a huge human being, and I can only assume that his punches hurt. So you should probably keep him on his back, which I expect St. Preux to do, because he's a very solid wrestler. And I think that St. Preux should be able to change levels and to force Rothwell into some uncomfortable situations. So for me, I think St. Preux is going to win this fight.
Okay. Next up on the card is looks like I'm trying to find the weight class here. It's Alexander Hernandez and Drew Dober.
Yeah, honestly, you can skip going through the weight classes because some fights have been they have to shift around the entire card. So the full fight cards aren't even fully listed really anywhere, with the exception of a couple of spots. But if you're going to use your typical like Wikipedia source here, Wikipedia wasn't even updated, so it's kind of.
No, I'm looking at the UFC site, but.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Honestly, you can just mention the fighters, and it's fine.
Okay, all right, good enough. So Hernandez and Dober, guys that usually fight around somewhere in the 155-pound range, just to give you an idea. Even though that may or may not be relevant, they're not little guys. They're not heavyweights. They're kind of in the middle. So Alexander the Great against Drew Dober. Alexander has just lost twice in his UFC career, and he is actually a small dog in this one. This looks like a pretty competitive fight from an odds maker standpoint. Hernandez minus 110, while Dober checks in at minus 120. Scott, where's the value here?
I think it's almost non-existent. And the reason why I say that is you kind of just touched on it based on the odds perspective. I don't really see much of an edge for either fighter in this spot. I just think it's going to be a very tough fight. And the reason why I say that is because Dober's been around the UFC for a long time. He's been a UFC fighter since 2013. So he's been around the block a few times. The issue that you have with Dober is that even though he's won 5 of his last 6 fights, he really hasn't fought against anybody of significance. And if you look at his actual resume on who he's beaten lately, the casual fan will have never heard of anybody that he's fought. He just hasn't fought against anybody that good. Now, Hernandez, even though he ended up losing 2 fights ago, he fought against one of the fighters in Cowboy Cerrone. So he actually went up against a well-known guy and ended up losing. So you can give him a little bit more of a pass because the strength of schedule was so much tougher. This fight, if I had to guess anywhere, I would probably assume decision. And the reason why is because both fighters have the ability to win by submission, which makes me believe that both fighters should do a pretty good job of canceling each other out into a wrestling stalemate type of situation. Now, Dober has a little bit more knockout power, but he's also had, just going through it, Dober has been in 31 career MMA fights, and 12 of them have gone to decision. So he has had a decent amount of decisions in his career, and this is just going to be a 3-round fight. I expect this to be very close. I think there is a chance that somebody wins inside the distance, but if you're looking for any potential value here, I'd probably just take this fight to go the distance. Okay. It should be plus money, so I would probably take that.
Actually, they've got the over listed on this one at minus 150.
Oh, well, that's the over rounds though. It's not the official distance.
Right.
So the distance probably is around minus 115.
So you're talking about, I don't have the props. I don't have any props listed. So you're saying wait for those props to come out and find it for this specifically to go the distance.
Yes, but I feel like if you're going to take, what's the over at 1.5 or 2.5?
Believe it or not, it doesn't have it listed.
Okay, so that's kind of worth noting because if it's at 1.5, then you're looking at a plus price for the distance, and if it's 2.5, then I feel like you're just better off taking the over at roughly. I feel like you're just better off taking the distance, which is like minus 110. But for me, I think this fight's gonna be very close. I think it's possible that there's gonna be a knockout. But considering the fact that odds makers think this fight can go either way, I can really see this fight turning into basically a stalemate where they're just gonna be going at it. So I think this fight will be close. So for that reason, I like the decision.
All right, excellent. And it should be noted that kind of an unusual situation for UFC. Neither one of these fighters has a large number of tattoos. So
okay, we'll keep that in mind. I didn't even know.
Okay.
That,
so now we're going to talk about a fight between two of the let's call them the little guys here. They usually fight.
They are the little guys. They are not like St Preux. I'll tell you that much.
No, they normally fight like in the neighborhood of 130 pounds, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be Ricky Simon and Ray Bourque, both of them from the United States. Both of them with pretty fine records. Ricky Simon, 15-3-0. Ray Bourque checks in at 13-4 and a zippo. Something's got to give here. It looks like you're going to have a situation where Ray Bourque is going to be your submission guy. Not much of a power puncher. He's fully won half of his fights by submission and 42% by decision, which means just 8% of his 17 fights. So I'm going to say that's going to be one fight has been a knockout for a victory for him. So if Bourque's going to win, it's like you were talking about earlier, kind of a situational thing. If Bourque's going to win, looks like it's going to be a decision or submission. Scott, it's Bourque is kind of an underdog here at plus 140. Ricky Simon minus 170. What you got going on here?
For me, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I like the Tasmanian Devil here. I like the underdog with Bourque at plus money. Main reasons why, I just think Ricky Simon isn't in good enough form to be laying this type of price. Ricky Simon, if you've looked at his last two fights, he lost to Uriah Faber in a knockout, and then he lost to Rob Font. Now, Rob Font is pretty good, so that's fine. You lose in decision, that's fine. Uriah Faber used to be really good, but he was 39 at the time, and he was in the middle of a decent losing streak. Actually, he really just wasn't doing that well. And then Faber, who, I mean, he's won 10 of his 35 wins by knockout, not really a knockout guy by any means, just completely put him on his back. So Simon's on a 2-fight losing streak, and yet he's that big of a favorite in this situation. I just don't think there's much value on Simon. Bourque, on the other hand, if you've looked at his fights, he's been doing pretty well. He's won each of his last two, and he won in decision, as you said. Bourque can win by submission. I understand that Simon has roughly a 6-inch reach advantage, which is definitely going to play a factor into why the odds makers maybe like Simon in this spot. But I think if Bourque takes it to the ground, I think he's just going to dominate on the ground because I just think he's the much better wrestler. So for that reason, I love Bourque by decision here. I think that if Bourque's going to win, it will be by decision. And I think that if you want to get a nice plus price there, plus 2-something, plus potentially 3-something, once again, the lines aren't up, so I'm kind of just guesstimating right now. I think that's a great deal for value. So I actually like Bourque to win by decision here.
Okay, very good. Yeah, because it's you kind of piece it together here. You got Bourque at plus 140 and the over at minus 300. So it looks like the odds makers think it's going to be a long fight. And just based, like I said, on just one of his 17 fights have ended with him being victorious via knockout. It looks like if you're going to pick Bourque, the money play is to pick Bourque in a decision.
Yeah, the thing, though, is that if you want to actually take submission guys, you have to make sure that your opponent is not good at submission defense. And Simon, even though he doesn't exactly have many submission outcomes, he only has 2 submission wins and 1 submission loss. I mean, he's also from the Gracie Association in Portland, and they're pretty much known as being the peak Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys, the Gracie family. So this guy knows what he's doing on the ground. So in other words, I think Bourque's the better wrestler, but Simon isn't going to panic on the ground. He should have some type of defense plan, and I think that should lead to a very long fight where they're kind of just on the ground with Bourque on top most of the time, which should lead to a decision.
And that helps us as well as we try to get a decision and not a submission, right?
Correct. So what I was saying is that the issue you run into is that if your opponent gets
submitted a lot.
Yeah, if your opponent's terrible in one area and the one guy excels in one area, that could lead to an early thing. But if both of them are above average, but one is slightly better, that usually leads to a decision because even though one guy's going to get the better of some exchanges, it should, for the most part, be a relative stalemate where it's not going to be totally lopsided.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. It makes total sense.
I like Bourque by decision in this spot for value.
All right. Very good. Moving on to Carl Robertson and Marvin Vittori. It's a fight there that the guys, again, not to zero in on the weight, but generally somewhere around 185 pounds is where these guys fight at. And Vittori from Italy, Carl Robertson from the United States. And in this one, Robertson is the underdog at plus 145, while Vittori is minus 175. Scott, tell us about this one.
For me, I'm taking the Italian here. I'm going to take Vittori. I think Vittori is one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC. If you've looked at his actual resume lately, or just who he's fought within the last 3 years or so, it's actually really good. And his last 2 fights aren't much to write home about, as I just said that. On the contrary, he fought Andrew Sanchez, most people don't know, and he fought Cesar Ferreira, won both by decision. The 2 fights he had prior, he fought against Amari Akhmedov. People don't know. That went to a draw. Akhmedov is 20-4. Akhmedov is a really good fighter, went to a decision, ended up being a draw. So he held his own against him. And then he also fought against the current world champion in Israel Adesanya, who's undefeated at 19-0, and Vittori lost in a split decision. So Vittori can handle these people. Vittori proved with his fights against those 2 guys that he has the ability to compete with the best, and he's not going to get embarrassed against elite-level competition. Now, Robertson is, I'd say, pretty good. He's 9-2. I'm not going to say that he's a scrub by any means, but at the end of the day, Vittori has gone up against significantly better fighters. And you're looking at Carl Robertson, who lost to Glover Teixeira, for example, by submission. I think Vittori could win by submission here. I think Vittori could win by decision here. I think that there's more ways Vittori's going to win than he's going to lose. Kind of like what I talked about the St Preux fight. So for me, I think Vittori's going to win. And I really just think you can make an argument for decision or for submission. I just think it's a safer play to take Vittori because I just think he's the much better fighter in this spot.
Well, and Vittori is the submission specialist. Full 62% of his victories have come by way of submission. So
it's also risky, though, in fights to gamble on submissions because everything's only 3 rounds.
Right.
If it was 5 rounds, then maybe you can argue you'll have more time to work. But only having 15 minutes in comparison to 25 minutes is a lot less time to find a stoppage. That's why it's very tough. But that's the point. I think Vittori could either win by submission or by decision, and I just don't see that luxury for Robertson. So I think Vittori is probably the move here.
And is that going to be is that going to be the they have it backwards here? Is that the main event, Scott, or are we on? I thought it was.
According to the actual fight card, that should be that should be one of the first fights on the main card, if not the first fight on the main card.
Okay, because I've got that listed. Yeah, okay, first fight on the main card. Okay,
it's
so
we've
just basically got
7th fight in order, so it should be on the main card.
Okay, so we've basically just gone through the main card here, right?
Yeah. Yes, basically.
Okay, all right. So yeah, they got it in reverse. So sorry. So let's talk about. All right, so let's talk about the next fight that I've got listed on the sheet, which is going to be Andre Arlovski against Philippe Linz.
Yep, that the pronunciation sound good. I mean, Linz is a relative unknown because he is actually going to be making his UFC debut in this card. He's fighting out of Brazil. He was originally in the PFL, which was that upstart league that was on ESPN also a couple of years ago that has the bracket style with the $1 million grand prize. It was the brand new MMA league that started up a couple of years ago. He actually won the championship in the heavyweight in 2018. So he was undefeated in the PFL, and he has not fought in roughly, I'd say, about a year and a half. So he has a little bit of a layoff here. But in terms of this fight, I like him beating Arlovski. Arlovski, I don't want to sound chalky because it seems like I keep taking favorites. Arlovski's 41. He's already fought 47 times. He's got 19 losses. I mean, Walt Harris in his fight ended up testing positive for something, so that fight got overturned by a no contest. But based on original outcome from a betting perspective, he's lost 5 of his last 6 fights. So I would lean Linz here. Arlovski, I think, is done. He has the ability to win by knockout because he has no chill at all. He'll charge you forward. He'll get into an absolute slugfest. He's not afraid of knocking you out or being knocked out. And I just think Linz is the better fighter here. I think there's a reason why Linz is favored. Even though he's shorter by a couple inches, he actually has the longer reach, so he does have a reach advantage. Linz hasn't fought in a while, but he just won a championship in another league, and Arlovski, I think, should have retired years ago. So for losing 5 year last 6, I can't really trust you in this spot. I think Linz is primed for a nice performance here. I'll lean to Linz.
Well, the odds makers certainly do have that book that way, as Linz is -155, while Arlovski is +125. So perhaps a little more value there on once the outcomes are released as far as the prop bets go.
If I had to lean anywhere, I'd probably lean to Linz by knockout, but it's really tough, honestly, because Arlovski can easily just swing, and he's had a very inconsistent chin where some nights his chin's really good, some nights his chin is really bad. It's kind of weird how it works, but that does seem like how most of his fights go. Linz has lost all 3 times by knockout, so he has been popped in the face a couple of times. But he also has won 8 fights by knockout, and I think that he has the potential to take this to the ground and then ground and pound Arlovski to submission. So for me, I'll lean to Linz here. I think that he's just the better fighter.
Okay. All right. Next up is Michael the Menace Johnson, fighting out of the United States with a 20-15 record versus Thiago Moises from Brazil, and brings a pretty nice 12-4 record so far in UFC to the table. This is exactly even as far as the odds makers go. I've got it -115 on both fighters. Scott, what do we got here?
For me, I'm not going to surprise you here. I actually love Moises by submission.
Okay.
I think that is an absolute steal of a price. I believe that should be around somewhere in the +450 range, potentially even higher, depending if you shop around. I think that's an absolute steal. And the reason why I said that is because I talked about how people who can win in a variety of ways tend to fight more towards the main card. And as you get to the earlier and earlier fighters, you mostly have specialists who win fights the majority of the time one way, which is mostly how that works. Moises is, I'd say that his outcomes have been diverse, but he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, and he is an unbelievable guy when it comes to wrestling and just jiu-jitsu in itself, as I just said. So he is actually well known in Brazil for being pretty much a jiu-jitsu prodigy. So he actually has a huge reputation in his home country in Brazil. Meanwhile, Michael Johnson, I talked about how usually if you want to bet exact outcomes, you need somebody to excel in one area and somebody to be terrible at guarding one area. Michael Johnson's lost 15 times, 8 times by submission.
Right.
He's awful when it comes to submission defense, and Moises is a phenomenal wrestle and grapple guy on the ground, and I think he should be able to create enough transitions, get it to the ground enough to submit Michael Johnson, because Michael Johnson's defense, as he's proven in the past, is underwhelming to say the least. So for that reason, if you're looking at an even fight that could go either way, I feel like it's worth a sprinkle here when you know that one opponent is awful in one dimension of fighting. So from that perspective, I think Moises +450 or so in submissions an absolute steal.
All right. Very good. Very good.
That's my opinion. I don't know what you think about that. I know you're not exactly familiar with a decent amount of these fighters.
No, you know, and I'm looking at these guys, and I'm looking at the numbers, and you know, based on the fact that Michael Johnson is it looks like if he's going to win, it's going to go to a decision. He fully half of his victories have come by way of decision, while just 10% have come by way of submission, and fully a third of Moises' wins have come by way of a submission. So the odds are the numbers certainly back up what you're saying there.
I think Johnson has a lot more experience in the UFC, so I think he might know how to piece together judges' scorecards a bit more. So I think he has a decent shot of winning in a decision. But I think if Moises is going to win inside the distance, it will be by submission. So for that reason, I actually just think there's too much value on the submission here. Because Johnson, as I showed before, you lose more than half of your losses come by submission. That means you can't guard against the submission. And if that's
right.
what Moises excels in, that's a really bad matchup for Johnson.
Yeah, that seems like a bad matchup there for one of these guys for sure. All right, so let's moving on, taking a look here at the chicks, man. Taking a look at the only ladies bout that is on the card for today, or for Wednesday rather. It's I'm gonna go with Sierra Eubanks and Sarah Moras. Is that about right?
Sounded good. I mean, both these fighters are, I can't say I'm really fully familiar with these fighters. I know that Eubanks is a huge favorite in this fight. But in terms of the outcome, the truth is I have no interest in watching this fight or betting this fight. I think this fight will be extremely boring. I think that this will go to a decision, and I believe the decision is somewhere in the realm of like minus 200 or higher.
Okay.
Odds makers, according to most people, just have this going to decision at like minus 200 and change. So I think if you wanted to potentially do something with Eubanks, you should just take Eubanks by decision. You should just be getting a minus 300 plus favorite at, I don't know, maybe roughly 150, 160.
Yeah, I've got Eubanks listed at minus 370 even. So,
but I believe the over should be around minus 200 plus or so.
I've got the over at minus 260.
That's what I'm saying. So I feel like if you wanted to use math there, instead of taking Eubanks as a huge favorite with the over, just take Eubanks by decision, and you should be able to cut into that heavy juice.
Yeah, you would think. Moras is from Canada, and she has the her nickname is Cheesecake.
I know that's not the nickname you want for a UFC.
No,
that is not what you want.
No, absolutely not. The
both fighters aren't good. I mean, I'm going to be clear. Both fighters, Eubanks is a minus 300 plus favorite, and she's 4-4. It's not like she's some type of phenom who's shown unbelievable stuff. They're both around 500.
Right.
So these are massive, unbelievable fighters. I think it's going to be boring, and I got to assume based on the odds makers here, I just think Eubanks is going to destroy and win by decision. Am I right? I just think it's going to be that simple.
I don't know. Eubanks, the UFC site has her listed at 5-4, and they've got Moras listed at 5-6.
Around 500. Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, exactly. So the reach is exactly the same at 67 inches. But yeah, I can't bet on Cheesecake. I'll tell you what though.
What price do you think you'd get from a minus 300 favorite, minus 320 favorite with a minus 260 like over for whatever? How much do you think you'd get for the favorite by decision? Like minus 160, minus 150?
Maybe.
Probably not bad. For value, that's actually not terrible.
Well, and Eubanks has never submitted anyone in her 9 fights.
She doesn't like to brag, but she's never submitted anybody.
That's right. She's more of a bottom. But she's won a full 60% of her victories by decision. And Moras is a little more well-rounded, 50 by knockout, 40 by knockout, 40 by submission, 20 by decision.
There's got to be a reason why the odds makers made Eubanks that big of a favorite, and there's so much money on the over as well. I just think Eubanks by decision there, you're cutting into 2 heavily juiced prices and getting 1 mediocrely juiced price. I feel like Eubanks by decision is really the only way to bet this fight.
Well, and I think Eubanks, it looks like, is a significant striker, averaging 4.64 strikes per minute. Well, Moras just lands 1.85. So if you want to
this fight should be boring. This is one of those fights where if you wanted to get dinner ready, if you wanted to put some bets in and then take a nap or something, you probably take a nap for about 20 minutes. I don't plan on actually enjoying this fight at all, but I would win Eubanks by decision.
Well, let's move on then, shall we? How about looking at Gabriel Benitez versus Omar Antonio Morales Ferrer.
Is that fight after the Azore Keller fight, or I'm not sure what the order is there.
Oh, you know what? On the on the betting sheet, I've got.
We can go in any order. I was just curious. I'm pretty sure the Azore fight is after the Ferrer fight, so I wasn't sure if we were going in that order or not.
Yeah. In fact, on the betting sheet, I don't have a line on. Or there we go. Oh no, it's got it at the. It's got it listed as the last fight.
Oh, okay, that's fine. It's fine.
So
yeah, we can do the Ferrer fight first. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Oh, the Ferrer fight is the one I don't have. I don't have. They've got it. Oh, that's why they've got it listed as Morales. Okay. That's what was throwing me. They have it listed as Omar Morales on the betting side.
He's around minus 170.
Yeah, minus 175, while Benitez is plus 145. And this was going to be somewhere again in the middleweight range around 150, 155.
Do you have a line on the over/under or no?
I do, but it doesn't tell me what it is. But I've got over at minus 155, under plus 125. Again, it's really weird. It doesn't list how many rounds that actually is, whether it's 1.5 or 2.5.
Okay, I was just curious. This fight, I think this fight's tough, just based on the actual matchup here. When in doubt, go with the undefeated guy. That would be my advice to you. Just until the guy actually loses, they're going to be priced as undefeated guys. So I think that you should probably keep that in mind. This fight, based on the matchup, Benitez is pretty solid in the submission game. He's got 10 submissions out of his 21 wins. He's also lost twice by submission, though. So he's been on both sides of the spectrum when it's come to submission outcomes. But overall, he's fought in the UFC for a while. He's kind of a UFC veteran, fought since 2014. He's had mixed results. He's 2-2 in his last 4. Meanwhile, Ferrer is actually going to be making his UFC debut, I believe, looking at his fights. No, he actually fought in UFC Fight Night 165 and the Contender Series, but he has significantly less experience in the UFC than Benitez. But if you've looked at his outcomes here, Ferrer, 5 of his 9 wins by submission. He's never lost. I'm going to lean to Ferrer here. I think this fight can be very close, but he's just looked very impressive. So if I had to lean anywhere, I'd probably go with the undefeated guy. This fight I think should be more even than people anticipate, but I think there's a reason why, despite how even I think it is, that Ferrer is favored by this much. So for that reason, I gotta lean to Ferrer here.
Okay, I got to tell you, I do hate his nickname. His nickname is Venezuelan Fighter.
Yeah, his nickname should have been Cheesecake.
That's maybe Boston Cream Pie. I don't know.
Something like that. Baker's Dozen Donuts. Something.
Yeah, there you go. He's from Venezuela, while Benitez is from Mexico. Benitez's nickname is Mowgli.
Okay.
So I don't understand it, but at least sounds cooler than Venezuelan Fighter.
Well, I don't know if that's his nickname or he just doesn't have one and they just call him a Venezuelan fighter. So I don't even know the answer to that. But according to SureDog, which is the source that I use for MMA breakdowns, he doesn't have a nickname listed. So I don't even know if he has a nickname. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm going to lead to Ferrer here. I think this fight is close, but I think there's a reason why the undefeated guy is a pretty sizable favorite here. So
now, if it's close, do you no value on plus 145?
That's the problem, is that I feel like there is, but if I'm being completely honest, I'm not really familiar with either fighter.
Okay.
I'm not really fully familiar with either fighter here. If you wanted to go based on the experience angle, you can go with the underdog here because he's been around the block a couple of times. But just based on what I'm looking at from these fighters and what I've seen from their resumes, I just think Ferrer is slightly better. And I think that there might be a reason why he is – like, at first glance, I thought this fight might have been a pick'em, maybe a minus 120, minus 130 for Ferrer. Minus 175 makes me believe that they just think Ferrer is going to kill this guy. I just think that line is very weird.
Okay.
Am I wrong for feeling that way?
No, it does seem like when you have, especially one of your fighters being kind of an unknown, being that much of a favorite, it seems like one of those things, for lack of a better expression, maybe a little bit of a trap line.
Yeah, because I really like Vittori, as I said before, against Robertson, and they're roughly the same price at minus 175. And I think Vittori should be a minus 200 or so favorite. So I think the fact that they're both around the same price there, I don't know. I feel like the odds makers just expect Ferrer to just demolish this guy.
Okay. All right. So beware right there, you're saying.
Yeah, you can take a flyer on Benitez if you want, but I don't know. That line looks a little bit odd to me.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Let's take a look here at again, some of the littler guys as we get Hunter Azur going against Brian Kelleher. Azur, if you like your undefeated fighters, there you got one right there, buddy. 7-0 in the UFC. And, of course, not surprisingly, he is the favorite at minus 185 versus Kelleher checking in at plus 155. You'll get better than 3-2 on your money. Should you go with? I was gonna put his nickname in here, and he doesn't have one. Oh, Boom, Brian Boom Kelleher. If you should want to go that way, you do get a nice price. Scott, is Boom going to be in the mix here?
I think he's got a shot to be in the mix. I know Azure kind of like what I said with Ferrer, not really the most experienced in the UFC, whereas Keller has been around for a long time. He's been in the UFC since 2017, so he's had a decent amount of fights there. Not really been performing that well lately. He is 1-2 in his last 3 fights. He's lost by knockout, lost by submission, won by submission. So he is able to potentially take this fight to the ground with 9 submission wins. He has 9 submission wins and 6 submission losses, which is kind of odd. I'm not really sure how exactly that works because I guess that means he's very good at attacking, but he can't defend for anybody.
Right.
I guess if you want Keller to win, I think you should take Kelleher inside the distance because I think if he's going to win, it will be by stoppage. I don't think that he'll win in a decision against Azure. I see this fight having 2 outcomes. I think either Keller wins inside the distance or Azure wins by decision. So for that reason, I'm going to lean to Azure by decision here. I liked Keller yesterday when I looked at the line initially, but once again, it's one of those situations where the undefeated guy is just priced as a pretty heavy favorite against the guy with more experience. And I feel like the odds makers once again know something here about this matchup, and I feel like chasing Keller might be fool's gold here. I think this fight's going to be close. But I think Azure, who is undefeated in decisions and undefeated in general, I think should win by decision. So I would probably go that way. It'll probably be a plus price. You can probably get him to win by decision at around, I don't know, plus 150.
Yeah, there should be some good money there. And I was going to ask you about that because it is kind of an interesting stat. Even though he's just fought 7 times, 3 of his 7 wins have come by way of knockout, which is isn't that kind of unusual for the smaller guys?
I mean, potentially. You also have to keep in mind of who they've actually been fighting against. If
Right.
you're fighting a bunch of random fighters in the Russian MMA fights in the Gulag, then I don't really know how good the competition is. So, I feel like you can't judge everything solely based on the outcomes that have been there. Now, based on Kelleher's results, though, he's only lost once by knockout, so he has a pretty decent chin. I think Azure should dominate in the stand-up, which is why I actually kind of think Azure should win this fight by decision. Because if Keller can take a beating in the stand-up, then, I mean, he's going to be losing the rounds, but the seconds will keep ticking away. So I think Azure by decision is a pretty solid move here at a plus price.
Okay. And I believe we've got 1 fight left on the card, and that is Ike Villanueva versus Chase Sherman. And that is going to be a heavyweight fight. Now, here is a nickname, my friend. I might have to start calling myself this as well. Chase Sherman, do you know what his nickname is?
I mean, I'm looking it up, but it's an all-timer.
He is the Vanilla Gorilla, sir.
That is elite. That's how I would describe that. That's phenomenal. That's better than cheesecake. That actually is better than cheesecake.
Yes, that is better than cheesecake. Isaac Villanueva it says I don't understand. It says his last fight. He's making his debut. Sorry, he is making his UFC debut. So Scott, maybe you can give us a little background on the guy that is not the Vanilla Gorilla.
So Isaac Villanueva was kind of a very interesting case where he's making a UFC debut. So a lot of people don't know he actually ended up fighting in Fury FC, which is another type of MMA league. And he ended up leaving on a 4-fight win streak there. All 4 fights ending within the first 3 minutes and 17 seconds by knockout. So he ended up getting a contract from the UFC because of his knockout performances at Fury. And that is why he's currently in the UFC. Now, this fight is very simple for me. Just take the fight to end in the first round. Somebody's hitting the ground. Somebody's going to go down. And that's the end of it. Do I know who it's going to be? If I had to guess, I would say Sherman. Am I certain it's going to be Sherman? No. Because Villanova...
You think Sherman is going to win or go down?
I think Sherman would be more likely to win by knockout in this fight because he has more experience against higher level competition. I mean, if you're talking about Fury FC, both these fighters, I mean, it's kind of weird because Sherman was a UFC fighter, and then he started doing some random ring promotion stuff for Island Fights, some other type of organization, but he has fought in the UFC in the past, so he has more experience in high-level competition. I don't know how good the level is of Fury FC. Definitely beneath UFC, I'll tell you that much. So I'm a little bit more confident with Sherman winning. But if you go through the outcomes here, Sherman has 13 wins, 12 by knockout, and he's got 4 knockout losses. And Villanueva has 13 of his 16 wins by knockout and 3 knockout losses. So both these fighters just want to punch each other in the face. And I think someone's going to go down in the first 5 minutes. So for that reason, if I had to lean anywhere, I would have leaned to Sherman by knockout. But I think you'd just be better off taking this fight to end in the first round. That prop's available offshore somewhere. Don't even take the under. If you can just find fight to end in first round, yes. Or fight not to get out of first round, no. Fight to get out of first round, no.
Right.
Probably around plus 120, plus 130. I would just take the plus money there. I think somebody's going to hit the canvas.
Okay. Good enough.
I'm assuming you'll agree based on the track records.
Yeah. Anytime somebody's winning 90% of their wins by way of knockout and none by submission, I think there's going to be some fists thrown in this heavyweight fight.
Yeah, well, just to also go through this, looking at the outcomes here. So Villanueva, each of his last 4 fights have ended in the first round by knockout, and each of Sherman's last 2 fights have ended by knockout in the first round. So, yeah, I don't expect much defense here. I kind of expect Rock'em Sock'em Robots, if you remember that game. There's a bunch of robots just constantly moving their fists at each other. That's what you're going to see. I think somebody's going to connect. It's pretty much who's going to get hit in the chin first. And I think that for 5 minutes, somebody's going to go down. So I would just take end in first round at a plus price.
There you go. All right, buddy. Well, that's our hump day card, and we're going to be back and take a look at the Saturday card later in the week. Maybe even be joined by the one and only Winning Willie. We'll see how that goes. That's a nice breakdown there, sir. I think you've acquitted yourself well. And I'm assuming if people want to follow you there on Twitter at Reichel Radio, you might have some last-minute adjustments there as some more of the lines come out.
Yes, I'll give out my leans with the lines and everything like that. Once again, if you backed my official plays, though, sorry. If you backed my exact decisions, my exact outcomes, then, you made a decent amount of money. So, hopefully this card will work out. I would say that I'm not as interested in doing the same exact decision, betting that I did on this past weekend. I just did it because I knew pretty much all the fighters and I was looking forward to the action. I'll probably play it a little bit safer this weekend because this card features a lot more unknowns in comparison to the stacked card that we had on Saturday, which is basically an anomaly in UFC. Usually you'll get a decent amount of unknown, decent amount of main guys. We pretty much had exclusively main people on that Saturday card, which is unlikely. This card hopefully will be entertaining. Definitely not as sold on the main fight. I do like Anthony Smith, but as a whole, definitely nowhere near the quality of Ferguson, Gaethje, Cejudo, Cruz, and all the other fights in that main card, and Overeem, Rosenstruck. So, you got to realize what it is. We were spoiled for Saturday. Hopefully this card will be entertaining as well. Regardless, I think most of you will be watching it anyway.
So basically it's kind of a Wednesday night card.
I'm actually not even used to Wednesday night cards. They used to do the Dana White Contender Series in the middle of the week, which was basically a couple of qualifiers trying to get a contract with the UFC, so they would fight for the right to potentially get a contract. And that was occasionally in the middle of the week. So I guess this is basically a substitute for that on the middle of a week Wednesday. I'm not complaining. It gives me something to look forward to in the middle of the week.
Absolutely. All right, man. Thanks very much for breaking it down. It's weird times we live in, man. We just did an hour and a half on the UFC. So
sounds fun.
It's a beautiful thing. It's live sports. It's betting, and it's whether if you're a casual, that's one of the things about being a casual fan, Scott, is like me. I don't need to see the superstars or the guys that are making their debut. I don't really know the difference.
No, because people are just punching each other in the face anyway. So it's
right. It'll be entertaining. There's an opportunity to make money. And yeah, I know I'll be watching. It's not pay-per-view, so I'll be checking that out on the ESPN Plus. If you don't have ESPN Plus, I'm not going to plug it and say this is a great time to get it because there's really nothing else going on. But during the regular season, ESPN Plus is a great thing to have. So there you go. All right, man. Anything else? Anything else before we go?
No, not really. I mean, I feel like most people have kind of noticed by how I cap MMA from this card and the last card. I like to go for plus prices. You have a lot of uncertainty when it comes to two people in an octagon just swinging at each other. And I feel like if you want to take huge money line favorites, you can, and you might win a decent amount, but your volatility is huge. Because if you just lose one huge money line favorite, it pretty much ruins your entire profit margin. So my advice for you, if you're an MMA fighter, even a boxing guy, try to find more exact outcomes. You might go, for example, if I went 1-2 on the official plays on that I posted on Twitter, I would have made money. I would have been 1-2 with profit. There are a lot of ways to find profit here where you don't have to judge things by wins and losses. You can judge it by profit margin. And by going 4-7 in exact results, I made over 9 units. You don't have to just pick wins and losses. If you find an edge anywhere in a specific method of victory, you can gain a ton of value that way. And that's how I'd recommend going about it. If that makes sense.
And it's similar to betting on the big four sports. If there's teams that that they're not going to score a lot. It's going to be, if they win, it's going to be a defensive struggle.
Soccer. It's like soccer betting 1-0 because the other team has scored 4 goals in the first 10 games of the season.
Right.
There are multiple ways to bet the same thing, but if you believe that there's a significant chance of this result exactly happening, I mean, you can look at a Man City versus a team that's getting relegated or a Liverpool, and you can say, oh, they're minus 700 favorites. And you look at 1-0, and it's like minus 120. Why would you not take that when you're getting significantly better odds on pretty much the same exact outcome that you projected in your head?
Right. It'd be similar to watching the Chiefs play a team with a good defense, where that if the other team is going to win, it's probably not going to be in a shootout. You can go ahead and probably play, Baltimore the under.
Yeah, the way that I would describe it is that the way that I try to cap MMA fights is very similar to correlated parlays, where a lot of people tend to try to either bet a money line with an over or a money line with an under. That's kind of like what I'm doing, except I'm trying to find a little bit more exact value by picking specific outcomes there. A lot of fighters, as I said, are pretty one-dimensional. And if you know that one fighter excels in one area that another fighter does not, usually the fight's going to play out the way that you think it's going to in your head. And books are so focused on the money line and totals, that's what most people are betting, that they might accidentally underestimate the value available in props. So you can, especially if you shop around, you can find some really good value there with 30 cents extra value, even if you just compare books. Bet boosts as well. You can really get a lot of options there.
Great point.
I told you on the last video, I mentioned the Ngannou and Hardy parlay both by knockout plus 450. It lost, but if you compared the books, the parlay was roughly plus 320, and you found a plus 450 on another book. It ended up going up to plus 475. So if you just shop around, you get you can find potentially an extra $1 of value on your props. And even if you lose, it's 100% worth the risk every time if you're getting that much extra value.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, that's all I have to say about that.
Very good. Very good. All right, man. That's a nice little lesson in value betting when it comes to the UFC as well. And with all of our other sports, of course, we always tell you to shop your line. So, well done, man. We're going to be back tomorrow and take a look. Finally, as we've talked about it for about a week now, we're going to take a look finally at the wide receivers, starting with the NFC wide receivers tomorrow in the NFL. Do the AFC wide receivers on Wednesday, and then I guess Thursday we'll be back to talk about the UFC card for Saturday. Is that about the way it breaks down for you, my friend?
Yes, and then for Friday, I know that we can discuss. So we're talking about potentially doing a Corona update show. I don't think there's any wrestling going on this weekend. So
no. No,
Yeah,
no.
so that's not really an option. I think we're mostly going to be looking at a Corona update on Friday.
Okay, there you go. So hopefully we'll have some word on some of the major sports league and what their plans are and when we're going to be looking at the return to the stadiums. So we'll see what happens there. I know MLB has another plan where they're looking at getting going. So we'll see what happens with all that. We'll be back for the Corona update later in the week. But tomorrow it's going to be AFC wide or NFC wide receivers. Looking forward to that as always. Scott, thanks for being here today. Had a blast. Really enjoy. I enjoy learning about sports that I'm not as well versed in, and expanding my ability and skill sets as a handicapper. So I hope our viewers are in the same boat as well. So for myself, for Scott Reichel, for all of us over here at Winners and Winers, again, don't forget to stop and check out winnersandwiners.com as we are writing current pieces on all the sports going on, including the Korean baseball, taking a look at UFC and esports as well. So make sure you stop by and check out winnersandwiners.com and our sister site over there at statsalt.com. Until tomorrow, I am Scott Steen. He is Scott Reichel. We are Today in Sports Betting. Thanks very much for joining us. Don't forget to drop us a comment. Let us know that you're out there. Let us know how things are going for you. And we'll be back to talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.